Joining us now, well, our next guest, who was part of the $700 billion TARP bailout program, previous administration, Neel Kashkari. He's now the head of global equities at Pimco, former assistant Treasury Secretary. He joins us from Newport Beach. Neel, welcome back to the show. Always love talking to you. What did you think of the State of the Union address from the president last night?
Well, I thought it was a great campaign speech. He hit on the right topics, which are jobs, the economy, fairness. Who can argue with fairness, education? These are all very important topics. We didn't hear much specifics, and he even admitted in the own speech that no one expects anything to get done in 2012. And so I think a lot of good ideas, but unfortunately not much is going to happen this year. And so the State of the Union is probably not going to have much of an effect on investors or on the markets.
Did it surprise you that he didn't reference the debt crisis that's swirling in Europe right now as a threat?
It did, but at the same time, if you think about, he's running for re-election, so he wants to focus on America, he wants to focus on the positives and try to downplay some of the risks. And so it's not that surprising. It's a little bit disappointing because I thought that as a country, we were getting much more focused on our long-term fiscal outlook. He clearly doesn't want to make that part of his re-election campaign, which I guess I understand. But at the same time, our fiscal challenges are very real. And unless Republicans and Democrats come together and take this issue on head on, we're not going to make any progress. And that starts with the president.
Well, he also referenced the intention to create a unit to investigate mortgage misconduct and roll out a transaction tax on financial institutions. Is that going to be implemented?
I think the unit, reorganizing the way prosecutors in the Department of Justice are organized is probably something the president can do without Congress. What effect it'll have, I don't know. There's always enormous pressure in Washington to show action on important issues. That could be giving a speech. That could be sending up legislation to Congress. That could be reorganizing some division within the government or actually passing legislation. I think the president recognizes that not much is going to happen legislatively, so he's looking for small wins that he can implement just through his own executive orders, and this is probably an example of that.
Neel, some of your previous work, if you call it that, from your time working for the Treasury was referenced quite directly last night as a sign of where the country should not be going. Let's listen in.
I'm sending this Congress a plan that gives every responsible homeowner the chance to save about $3,000 a year on their mortgage by refinancing at historically low rates. No more red tape, no more runaround from the banks. A small fee on the largest financial institutions will ensure that it won't add to the deficit and will give those banks that were rescued by taxpayers a chance to repay a deficit of trust.
The deficit of trust there, Neel. Yet the president also talked about the bailout of automakers having really led to one of the great successes of his administration. What do you make of that?
Well, again, I think that this is political rhetoric for his re-election campaign. I think every American, myself included, was against all of the bailouts. We hated having to bail out the financial sector. We frankly hated having to bail out the auto sector. We would much rather have let the market work. But when the economy was in such a state of peril, we had no choice but to intervene. Europe is facing a similar challenge. No one in Europe wants to bail out countries like Greece, like Ireland, like Portugal, even Italy and Spain, and yet the European economy is in such a perilous state, they have no choice but to act. And so this is a real challenge facing everyone. I certainly hope the U.S. never faces a financial crisis like we faced in 2008. I hope it never happens again. Unfortunately, history suggests that these things have a way of repeating themselves after people's memories have faded.
Well, what do you think, Neel, about some of the tax policy changes that not only the president has talked about, but have become really fodder on the campaign trail, specifically capital gains and carried interest? Do you believe that we will see a change in the way that those financial transactions are taxed?
Honestly, I'll be surprised because while I think every American should be for fairness, and it is outrageous that, Warren Buffett pays lower tax rates than his secretary, who can argue that that's not an unfair system. At this point in time, with so many millions of Americans out of work, I think most Americans are apprehensive about raising taxes that could stifle job growth. I think right now, here at home, our number one priority needs to be putting millions of Americans back to work, not just those who are technically unemployed today, but those who've given up looking for a job. We need to create jobs for those folks. We also need to get our fiscal house in order through long-term structural pro-growth policies, and we need to achieve fairness. So we have a lot of competing objectives right now. It's hard to focus on just one.
Do you understand what the so-called Buffett rule actually is?
You know, I don't. I mean, I understand conceptually that someone, a billionaire like Warren Buffett, everyone should pay their fair share of taxes. I get it conceptually. We saw a lot of high-level policy ideas last night. We have not seen the details. And, of course, the details matter a lot because they can lead to unintended consequences. And so I look forward to seeing the granular details.
Of course. And I know you have a really sort of a global approach to how you invest right now in the equity space. There was reference in this speech last night to multinationals and basically trying to dissuade them from outsourcing and give them incentive to bring jobs back to the United States. How do you structure a tax system in a way that incentivizes that?
Well, I think it has to start with lower tax rates for corporations. Now, this is a tough challenge because corporations overall effectively are paying very low taxes today, though the marginal rates in the U.S. are very high compared to many other countries. And there's a global competition for talent. There's a global competition for businesses. Every country wants to create jobs in their own country. And so I'm not sure if it would work to actually raise taxes for companies that are investing abroad. That may just encourage them to shift their headquarters abroad. And so I think this is a very challenging policy issue if we want to encourage companies to invest in America. The best way to do that is to make America a very hospitable, very welcoming place for business, a lot of certainty, less regulatory red tape. That can encourage businesses to invest here. But those are hard to do just with the tax code.
Right. And we know the administration has more or less ruled out a repatriation holiday. What could that possibly look like?
Again, it's hard to know. I think if you lowered the marginal tax rates on corporations, but at the same time got rid of some deductions, you could in effect smooth the playing field. Right now, it's much easier for large corporations to take advantage of many of these deductions than for small businesses. I think intuitively most Americans would like to see that be fairer so all businesses can benefit. And so by lowering marginal tax rates, that could incentivize more investment in America. But at the same time, we should get rid of some of the complex deductions so that we are not lowering corporations' fair share of their burden supporting the U.S. government, supporting the economy.
All right. Neel Kashkari, thanks so much for making time, giving us your response to the State of the Union.